you can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4, you can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific and how.
Martha Kent is not having a good day. Jonathan is trying to fix the sink and surprisingly doesn't end up severing a pipe and spraying water all over the place, which happens 98% of the time when someone tries to do their own plumbing on television. And so Martha decides to move the flour canister into the cellar for fear he might find the octagonal key, which he hid back in Insurgents. Why not just put it in the cellar in the first place? We know nobody ever goes down there except for extra food, and nobody but Martha cooks in this family. But I guess if she'd buried it there in Insurgents, she'd be a hostage and end up kicking up spores that gave her a deadly illness in the same day, and it's not like this is a season of 24. Martha inhales what looks like some deadly particles of kryptonite, and shortly thereafter drops a pitcher of lemonade and nearly falls on a conveniently upright, super sharp piece of glass. Good thing her kid has superpowers, or this would have turned into a much different show. Why does this wholesome family drama always have to insert these really nail-biting, over-the-top hazards? She can't just fall to the floor and get rushed to the hospital and find out she has an incurable illness. No, she has to come inches away from impaling her face before the opening credits. We've got another episode where there's so much drama in a hospital, it's hard to remember you're not watching ER. Clark and Jonathan start discovering Martha's secrets, first that she's pregnant, and then later that she hid the octagonal key from them. Helen mentions the baby offhandedly, naturally thinking that Jonathan would already know about it, and he's shocked. You think your life's strange and complicated now. Just wait until Martha starts talking about how she's pregnant because of a spaceship. So did Martha never go to the doctor, even in secret, about her baby? Or maybe she went to a different doctor, even though everybody acts like Helen is their standard family practitioner. Because you'd think Martha would have told Helen she didn't want anyone to know she was pregnant and not to tell Jonathan, especially since she's known herself for at least 2 months and has been afraid to tell anyone. And she's cutting it extremely close. I don't know how long she's been pregnant, and the show remains really vague about that, but it can't be too much longer before she starts showing. Ryan read her mind and found out about it exactly 8 episodes ago. And since 1 week between episodes generally equates to a whole week in real time, that's 2 months. No telling how long she knew before that or how long she was pregnant before she realized it. Since she didn't think she could have children, and since I'm assuming it's a pretty mild pregnancy, since Jonathan doesn't have an inkling of it, i.e. she probably doesn't have any morning sickness, there's a good chance she was pregnant for at least a month before even she knew about it. She says she was afraid if she said anything it would go away because it's such an unbelievable miracle caused by a spaceship. The DCA, the Disease Control Agency, is called in, and they ransack the Kent farm, trying to determine what dangerous substance infected Martha because there's concern it could contaminate other people. I don't know why Smallville has a made-up department for this. It's the equivalent of the real-life CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Most series, and even superhero comics, don't replace the big major agencies like this. You've got private scientific outfits like Cadmus and Star Labs, but usually something like the FBI or the CIA or the CDC would just be those agencies. Power Rangers had NASADA instead of NASA, but I don't see that a lot. This is like calling the FBI the FIB, the Federal Investigation Bureau, instead of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But I guess if you call anything FIB, especially with so many conspiracy theories developed around it, people would assume even more that you must be lying. Jonathan tells Clark to rush home and hide the spaceship, and he stands around long enough to get infected himself before he gets in his truck and tries to speed it over to Pete's place. Like his mom, Clark doesn't start feeling the effects of the spores until a few minutes after he inhales them. Unusual, since that sort of thing tends to kick in immediately in this show, like the adrenaline rush condition 2 episodes back. He loses control of the wheel and gets his truck stuck in a ditch, and also, unusually, doesn't get into a car wreck. Clark discovers his strength is gone when he attempts to move the truck off the road. At first, Pete thinks he's kidding. You know, because somebody stopping and finding out about the spaceship is laugh-out-loud hilarious, and then he seems more irritated than surprised when Clark really has lost his powers. With their normal human strength combined, Clark and Pete manage to get the truck off the road just as the DCA flies past them to rip the farm apart. Man, the farm's been getting ransacked a lot lately. Good thing the cops found everything they thought was relevant to the murder case Jonathan was framed for and suspect before they got to the storm cellar. After Clark and Pete get the ship to Pete's place, Clark goes back home and watches with Jonathan as the DCA covers the farm like the CDA in Monsters Incorporated, looking for a kid they think is going to contaminate their world. They find the offending spores, and they also find the octagonal key Martha buried, and Clark and Jonathan pretend like they've never seen it before. They bag it up along with other contaminated elements and leave, but the lead agent warns them that they're watching. Always watching. Nah, he doesn't say that. His team just sterilizes the storm cellar, and they're on their way. Now both of Martha's big secrets have come out, and Jonathan confronts her on what's starting to look like her deathbed about the second one. She says she hid the key because she was afraid if Clark discovered his origins, he'd leave them. Jonathan promises that's not going to happen, but it's not too long before Clark challenges that promise by succumbing to the symptoms of the same deadly illness she has, which really shouldn't surprise Jonathan at all. Yes, his son is invulnerable and all that, but he was in the storm cellar that day, and it can't be coincidence that his powers start cutting in and out on him like a poorly screwed in light bulb. Okay, it is this show. I guess that could have been a coincidence, but of course this time it's not, and Clark falls down the front steps and is then bedridden. I'm surprised this illness doesn't lead to coma like the spores in Nicodemus, but then I guess Martha couldn't drop the big bombshells and Clark couldn't fulfill the Superman save the day quota for this episode. So Helen makes a house call to find out what's wrong with Clark. Right, let's pretend like it's a small enough town a doctor would even entertain the notion of dropping everything and driving to someone's house. She does say that he needs proper care in a hospital, but I can't imagine what Jonathan could have said on the phone that would get her there. Jonathan takes the risk of letting her look at Clark, knowing she's liable to discover his secret, and setting her up to maybe become the Leslie Tompkins of this show. But he's become so weak that a needle passes through his skin without any trouble, and she's able to take a blood sample. Now Jonathan has 3 problems on his hands. His wife is dying, and right after this we're told she might not make it through the night. Clark is going down the exact same road, and Helen is going to analyze his blood and likely discover he's an alien. Jonathan tells Helen to promise him that no one else will study Clark's blood, and after this episode, she has a foot in the secret circle of superpower knowledge. By the way, there's a lot of people leaving secret information and other stuff out where people they don't want to find it can. Deceiving your loved ones 101. Bury things more than a foot deep, and always shred your paperwork, kids. Oh, and speaking of, the document Chloe forgets to shred is a handwritten letter professing her love for Clark in a very dramatic, early high school note-passing sort of way. She tells a sleeping Clark that she's the girl of his dreams masquerading as his best friend. And I bet you can guess what happens next, even if you haven't seen this one. No, go ahead, guess. I'll give you a couple hints. It's Smallville. Nobody stormed out of a room dripping tears on the floor this episode yet. We've been laying the love triangle on so thick, it looks like a birthday cake if iced by my 18-month-old. Fill in the blanks here. Chloe tells Clark she's in love with him while he's unconscious, and he, says Lana's name and rolls over. Of course. Jonathan, with no other recourse, goes to the place where the CDC keeps all the belongings they put in quarantine to get the octagonal key, which he plans to put in the ship so it can cure Martha and Clark of this mysterious illness no one knows anything about. I'm not making that up. That's his plan. Hey, wait a minute. The DCA guy told Jonathan where the quarantine site is? I don't know if that's what happened, but how else would he know that? Jonathan sneaks past this bit of logic with a throwaway line of dialogue. I know exactly where this DCA took everything. And it's in or right outside of Smallville? Gee, it's sure convenient he didn't have to go very far. And the place is crawling with military guys with guns, and it looks like it's in the middle of nowhere. How did that conversation go? We had to take some of your stuff that's contaminated with radiation and likely to make someone else sick. You can't have it back until we're sure it's clean. If you try to take anything, you'll be arrested. But hey, here's the address in case you want to try. Knock yourself out. Jonathan plays spy, and Smallville plays X-Files, as Jonathan sneaks around a creepy government warehouse in the dark like he's Mulder about to uncover some juicy conspiracy. He's caught by a guard and about to have to put on that orange jumpsuit for the second time in a month when Clark, who suddenly has his powers back because the script needs him to, knocks out the guy and they leave with the key. And then it plays out exactly as Jonathan hoped it would. They take the ship to the hospital. I guess Pete's mom must be out of town. She doesn't seem to notice these people taking a ship in and out of her garage. turns it on, there's a big bright light, and Martha's cured, actually brought back to life, as this happens moments after she flatlined and the time of death was pronounced. So yes, Martha Kent has died and come back to life before Superman in this world, and while Clark Kent is a sophomore in high school no less. Meanwhile, Helen has been offered a 3-year research fellowship at Johns Hopkins, which Lex graciously encourages her to pursue until he discovers she might hold the key to learning Clark's secret, and then suavely but dubiously backtracks at the end, pretending like he's changed his mind and has to ask her to stay, giving her a key to the mansion. Somehow Helen isn't remotely suspicious about this, regardless of how quickly he changes his tune, and she accepts. At the end, Clark, his family, and his friends all enjoy a concert put on by Stedman at Martha's charity fundraiser. I guess with Lex Luthor as your investor, you can get whatever band the TV show wants to promote that week to show up at your coffee shop. And then there's the blatant, shameless plug of the compilation CD you can buy in real life. Yeah, the Talon mix actually shows up in this show. I'm surprised it didn't have a price tag and the name of a major retailer on it. It's like the first season of Heroes, making sure nobody forgets Heroes driving a Nissan Versa. Why have commercial interruptions? You're selling enough advertising inside the show, you might be able to get along without them. Chloe stares at Lana talking with Clark from across the room, as if they both know something about the other they didn't before this episode, even though what was in the letter and what Clark said when he was asleep isn't news to either of them at all. And they've both got an acute case of love triangle face. It's an epidemic! Rush them to the hospital! Call the DCA! Then credits. It's pretty padded out and it's really derivative, but I can't say I'm not enjoying the X-Files atmosphere this episode. Mark Snow's music fits a little more here than it does in some other episodes, since he doesn't score this show all that differently from what he did on X-Files, and it's fun how the roles of in-the-dark hero and conspirator antagonist are reversed. It feels a little off because it's like Clark and Jonathan should be uncovering some fantastic supernatural force, until we're reminded that we already know what the mystery is and who the conspirators are, and it's everyone else that's trying to figure that out. So it's like an X-Files episode from the perspective of a benign alien who's afraid of being tracked down and hunted by a government that doesn't understand him. Sort of an E.T. vibe. The main purpose of this episode is to pay off a couple things we've seeded with Martha, probably because we're running right up against when it would be impossible for her to hide her pregnancy, and because we're getting into the home stretch of the season and we don't want Martha's secrets to look like the main event we've set up for whatever our epic season finale, likely some sort of cliffhanger, is going to be. Spoiler alert, it is a cliffhanger. Spoiler alert again, they're all cliffhangers. So there are major revelations here like you might get in an X-Files mythology episode, but nothing Clark learns he gets through investigation. But I like this spooky atmosphere for an episode dealing directly with the spaceship and what it can do. This is before Clark has any idea where he comes from or what sort of people his biological parents were. So from his perspective, anything could happen with that ship, and it does play as a genuine, fascinating mystery that carries us directly into the next episode, that fateful moment when Clark learns quite a bit about where he comes from. There are things that already aren't adding up, but it feels fresh and new for the audience because even though we think we know Clark's origins, this is a reimagining and theoretically anything can happen. But emphasis on anything because it's already starting to look a little silly. The ship healing Martha is an easy Deus Ex Machina that tries to play like it's set up and paid off way more intelligently than it is. But I like Martha's real motherly fears, and Annette O'Toole plays it with a convincing air of embarrassment that makes me a lot more sympathetic toward her than I usually am when people who are supposed to be all about honesty decide the rules don't apply to them. I also like that Martha doesn't hide things out of any sense of entitlement. Her reasons are totally selfish, but they have nothing to do with whether or not she trusts her family. Her fear that she might lose the baby if she talks about it might be superstitious, but that's a little understandable given the strange circumstances of Clark's arrival, which certainly seemed like a miracle to her, underscored for her by the coincidence of Lana pretending to have her make a wish and that wish being granted for her that very afternoon, albeit accompanied by a brisk shower of doom and destruction. I like both of these secrets being uncovered simultaneously, and not in too contrived a fashion, because Martha's motivation for keeping them both is the same, her fear of motherhood being taken away from her. She's afraid of losing the baby she never thought she could have, and she's afraid Clark's biological parents might swoop down from the sky and he'd go back with them. And again, spoiler alert, but her fears are both real because they both come true in some form later. More on that down the line. The origins of Martha's adoptive son and her baby are intertwined, and the first can't happen without the second. So while Martha is afraid to let Clark open the ship and learn where he comes from, her pregnancy wouldn't be possible without the ship, and she'd also lose her life and the babies if not for both the ship and Clark himself. The thing she's afraid will take what matters most from her is also the device that prevents her from losing it. The future is uncertain, but she can't stop it, and bad things tend to happen when she doesn't trust her family. There's a pattern here that involves more than just the ship and her pregnancy. When she hid Lionel's watch from Jonathan, he smashed it, and that became evidence against him when he was a suspect in Lionel's shooting. Jonathan is certainly responsible for his own temper, and as I said when I reviewed Suspect, that somewhat damning evidence wouldn't have existed if he kept his cool, but it also probably wouldn't exist if his wife had told him about it in the first place. She was out of character when she worked for Lionel, despite his history blackmailing Jonathan, but this seems like the kind of mistake she might actually make, and hopefully learn from. I like the subtlety in the Lex subplot, even if I think Helen would have questioned Lex for his abrupt change in position on her taking the Johns Hopkins Fellowship. We may be able to chalk that up to the long con it turns out she's playing on Lex by the end, because Lex can't have ulterior motives for being interested in a girl without her playing the exact same game on him. I never bought that twist, and it always seemed like an afterthought, so even watching this episode with that in mind, her side of it doesn't play naturally, but we'll talk about that when we get to the most soap opera moment of the season. Lex's motivations aren't spelled out to the audience, to the point where, on first viewing, I didn't understand Lex's change of heart and wondered if there was a scene missing. I thought his asking the hospital employee for Martha's chart at the end was just his being smarter than everyone else and guessing it was probably kryptonite related, since we know he's interested in the properties of the meteor rock. I also can't help but wonder if that's that orderly she drop-kicked back in Dichotic, and this is how he's getting his revenge. But he seems to have asked her to stay because he knows she has access to information about Clark he doesn't. I don't know that I buy he got enough of a look at the file Helen quickly hid from him to have any idea what he was looking at, but I also enjoy the intrigue in that scene, both of them talking about one thing, but clearly really thinking about and trying to accomplish something else. Lex genuinely cares about Helen, and I think he meant what he said when he asked her to help him break down the walls in his heart. And it's really sad to see him reduce this relationship to another tactic in his obsession with discovering Clark's secret. For everything he does to push past his natural inclination to use people, he does something else that makes him more and more comfortable with it. I am confused about why Lex asks for Martha's file when it seems like it's Clark's blood record he's after, although I doubt if the guy he's working with could really get that for him. Is he after information on Clark or on Martha's illness here? This is the episode for me while the show was on, where the shark was really starting to look up and wonder if Smallville was going to take its jet ski and go all the way over. Yes, it's a show that's built on some absurd premises from the beginning. You can mix kryptonite with anything and give a character any power you want. Our main character is a kid whose parents make him live in the only town in the world filled with the only thing in the world that can kill him. And sell the farm and move to Massachusetts. What's wrong with you? But while there's certainly some thought behind how Clark's ship is used to deal with Martha's fear about what she can't control in her own life, it is really hard to take scenes seriously with lines like, "And your mother thinks the ship helped her get pregnant." In context, out of context, it doesn't matter. Martha's about to die, and I'm trying my best not to bust a gut laughing. O'Toole and Schneider both deliver their lines about that with the straightest face I've ever seen on television, and that's why they're on TV, and I'm just here making fun of their TV show on YouTube. Some of it's wording. There has to be a way to make it sound like the ship isn't involved in intermarital relations. But any way I try to think about it, I'm sorry, Clark's spaceship healing people is just ridiculous. And I doubt very seriously if that's what anyone had in mind back in Tempest. It plays like we've been dropping clues all this time and it's all coming together, but how does neutralizing kryptonite, which it did envisage, equate to magically healing people no matter their ailment? Suddenly the thing that brought Clark to Earth has the potential to solve way more problems than he does. People are always talking about how overpowered Superman is and how difficult that makes him to relate to. And how about someone with all Clark's powers who also owns a machine that can heal people? Oh yeah, not just heal people, but bring them back to life. Now you got an invulnerable guy with only one weakness, with a contraption that can eliminate the radioactive properties of that weakness and bring him back from the dead if it does kill him and it's just a little too late. It's like the Tribble blood in Star Trek Into Darkness. It's hard to feel like anything's at stake when you can bring people back to life, but at least the blood in darkness is a finite thing. This seems to have no limits at all. Now, anytime someone's sick or hurting or dying, it'll be hard not to think, come on, Clark, just go get your instant healing spaceship and bring it a potato and see if it makes julienne fries. And gee, I wonder what's going to happen to that spaceship by the end of the season. It's also totally unbelievable that Clark is able to function at all with this illness. We're never told if the spores are kryptonite, but they're green and they affect Clark's powers. He shouldn't be able to inhale any amount of lingering meteor rock that doesn't put him in a coma at the least, if not kill him, when he's totally incapacitated when a sliver of it is hanging around his neck. And how can he even be in the storm cellar with particles of kryptonite hiding a foot or less under the soil? Chloe comes off as pathetic and kind of despicable for being such a drama queen at Clark's bedside. I get it. She's a sophomore in high school. Teenage girls, teenagers in general, tend to get theatrical and take everything personally. It's not a good homecoming dance or a spring formal if you don't get your heart broken and cry into a cup of punch on the bleachers, venting to your best friend while she texts someone else and pretends like she's not paying attention. And I might be revealing too much about myself, but I had a lot of female friends in high school, and I too was guilty of passing melodramatic notes to them in class. I don't begrudge Chloe the letter itself, but her behavior here is ridiculous. First and foremost, this is her best friend, and he might be deathly ill. Jonathan is probably playing down the severity of his illness, but he's letting on that it's bad enough that he's going to allow Chloe to come in and sit with him. Clark saying Lana's name is the most typical eye-rolling plot point I can think of there, but Chloe's reaction is even worse. I think her self-absorption level just spiked past Lana's, and one of her only lines this episode is, "I couldn't bring myself to see him." Does that make me a horrible person? Not compared to Chloe, but I can give you a list of other things that do if you want. We've regressed this love triangle back to toddlerhood. The letter only works if Chloe has been hiding her feelings for Clark all this time. It might be sort of sweet and sad if this were how the show first acknowledged Chloe's romantic interest in Clark. Like she reads that letter because she hasn't had the courage to say it out loud, and now she's afraid she'll never get the chance. But she's made it painfully clear since the end of last season, getting positively passive-aggressive about it 2 episodes ago in Rush. This isn't about her being afraid she'll regret never telling him the truth, which would be at least as much about him as it would her. This is her regretting that she can't change him and get what she wants from him. She doesn't even seem to like Clark anymore. His very presence seems to annoy her much of the time because she's so caught up in her jealousy. 16 episodes ago, she acted like she'd try to accept it, but instead she's just been vindictive. All these people know how all these people feel about each other, and we keep acting like we're progressing story with these moments, when all it does is make me like them all less. Clark's the only victim in this particular episode. He got sick. He likes Lana. He was dreaming about her and said her name out loud. You're really gonna hold that against him? Chloe and Lana both are rattled seeing Clark sick, and the idea at the end seems to be that they're realizing just how much they care about him and how they can't imagine their lives without him. This would have been a really good chance to see them both grow up a little, maybe at least try to put the high school melodrama aside while they're getting a taste of real life, and figure out that they both care about Clark and own up to how much they owe him, that fleeting romances are secondary to the reasons he really matters to them. I realize they've all been in near-death situations, so that probably should have happened already, but that would be the way to move ahead here instead of just stalling out. But then we have to keep progressing those relationships and write characters who change and grow steadily over time, and it's a lot easier to just keep switching between second gear and reverse. Hey, finally a question I can ask Jarrell about something that's actually directly related to him. Never mind how your ship cures anyone from any illness, we all know you're God. That's why I know you'll be there when I die. But how did your ship know what exactly Clark and Jonathan wanted it to do when they turned it on? Is it also telepathic? Did it cure everyone in the hospital from their ailments and Helen just didn't think to mention that to Lex when they talked about her miraculous recovery? Or was it an especially slow day at the hospital? And now let's go on to the count. We've got one instance of bullet time. That's when Martha falls into the broken pitcher and Clark rescues her just in time. That one maybe is just slow motion, but I'm going to count it since Clark is involved. We've got one instance of somebody walking away angry, or I should say storming off crying. I kind of lump those together. I think there is some anger there because it's jealousy, but she's, more sad than anything. But anyway, that's when Chloe, of course, pours her heart out to Clark, and he says Lana, and she walks away. We've got an instance of Clark on green kryptonite, I think. I still say that's all the spores could possibly be. We've got one instance of Clark losing his powers, and we've got one instance, or a first instance, of a character being brought back to life. And, of course, that's Martha Kent right at the end of the episode. I'm going to give Fever a 2 out of 4. It's getting harder to take the show's mythology seriously, just as we're getting dangerously close to Clark's discovering what Krypton is, and the climax is predictable and silly, but I like the bleak, somber tone up until the ending, and Clark's parents both shine. Martha more so because of the whole bright light thing at the end. Was there anything I missed in any category? Leave me a personal message on Geekvolution, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.
You give me fever when you kiss me, fever when you hold me tight. A fever in the morning, fever all through the night. Oh, everybody's got